Hey, Sleeper on Your Marks Wrestling, and I'm here with an Impact review for June 7th, 2018. The show starts with a video package of pretty much a summary of last week's episode. Nothing new on there. We start with a match between Drago and Aerostar versus DJZ and Andrew Everett for the Tag Team Championships. Everett and Aerostar do kind of a dueling display of athleticism early on. There's a team flapjack by the Luchador guys, which I thought looked good. It was on Everett. At some point, DJZ starts hitting moves on both of the Lucha guys. I'm just saying Lucha guys saves me a few words. DJZ does a suicide. There's a kind of multi-dive spot. DJZ does a suicide dive on Drago. Then Everett does a moonsault onto kind of both of them. And then Aerostar does a corner crossbody onto all three of them. Eventually, DJZ hits a big DDT on Aerostar, and Everett hits a 630 on him, and they get the win that way. A very decent match, not as special as a lot of recent matches with these guys, but it was fine. We get the typical green screen preview. Really nothing new comes from it. Just like a little update on the X poster thing, attacks. Nothing special though. Then we get a recap of the Edwards-Callahan feud, because we're going to be seeing a not street fight, but a woods fight. There's a short video package for Su Yung. Again, nothing special. Then we get LAX, who are in their usual kind of hangout, and Diamante shows up, and they're excited to see her. But then she kind of questions King's role in terms. She says, like, don't you guys wonder about how King is kind of just taking over now and stuff like that? And LAX, the guys just kind of dismiss it, but you can see that she's kind of thinking about things more than they are. And then she has a weird kind of encounter with King. I actually thought this might have been the most interesting thing on the whole show. It was set up well. It was acted fairly well by the people in it. I actually thought. I think it was my favorite spot of the show now that I think about it. Then we have Sanjay Dutt, and this might have actually happened just before this, but Sanjay Dutt and Petey Williams in a shouting match. Basically, it sounds like Sanjay Dutt might have accused Petey Williams of attacking him last week, and Petey Williams is just taking that, well, is very offended by that. He says he's going home. Then we get a match between the Cult of Lee and LAX. Cult of Lee dominates early. Trevor Lee at one point claps his hands to convince the ref, who was looking in another direction, that there was a tag. I thought that was clever. There is a rolling cutter by Santana that looked cool. Then Ortiz hits his kind of second rope tope con hilo, where he goes at like 45-degree angle kind of deal. I thought that was pretty good. He landed on that on Lee. At one point, Lee German suplexes Ortiz, and then Conley jumps over him for a jackknife cover because Lee was not the legal man. I thought that was a really cool combo. Eventually, though, there's a wheelbarrow cutter landed by LAX, and they actually get the win. It's their first win in a while, so it's kind of nice. Well, it's nice for them to get back on the winning track, and you see that King is there, and he's kind of, I don't know if he's getting the credit, but obviously he thinks that he was the one who led them to this win. So then we get the Facts of Life with Eli Drake. He's running down the top 5 dummies in in Impact. Number 5 is the Fans. Number 4 is Austin Aries. Number 3 is Management. Number 2 is the Fans again. And then number 1 is Moose. You expected him to say Scott Steiner at some point, but he never does. Drake reminds the crowd of his win for the briefcase over Moose, and explains that the winner of the match next week between he and Moose will get to face Aries at Slammiversary. Then Moose comes out, and he reminds Eli of his recent big losses, both in the championship match that he used the briefcase in, and in his tag team match. Drake attacks Moose, and he hits the gravy train on Moose, and then he throws the podium onto Moose. And that's kind of the end of that segment. And it'll just take me a second to pop this open here. Boom. Then we had a match between Rohit Raju and Brian Cage. This is a squash match, and it basically ends with Weapon X for Cage. He gets the win. Matt Sydal's music comes on. He says that he sees the inner weakness in Cage and he can help him. He saw it via his third eye. He offers to help him as long as Cage agrees to forego his X Division Championship match next week. Cage instead F5's Sydal. Then we have Eddie Edwards telling the camera guy that he should film the whole fight in the woods. Then we have Josh Matthews interviewing Austin Aries, who's on vacation, via Skype. Matthews asks him a few kind of softball questions, but then he goes and he asks about the low blow. Aries says, hey, did Ric Flair ever cheat to win his matches? Does anybody question his victories? Kind of a clever response. And then Matthews prompts him or asks him who has the advantage in the Moose versus Drake match, and he actually gives the advantage to Drake. Says he's got more experience, he's willing to bend the rules a little bit more. We get a tiny little kind of thing after a commercial from Johnny Impact, who reveals that he's coming back at Slammiversary. I think he was away for a wedding or something like that. We get a little Madison Rayne video package and her feud with Tessa Blanchard. Then we have Mackenzie Mitchell with Tessa Blanchard, who's kind of running down Madison Rayne and all that stuff. Kiera Hogan comes out and she kind of teases Blanchard about her loss against Rayne. Blanchard ends up attacking her and kind of destroying her until officials separate her from her. And then we get the fight in the woods, and I looked at the time and I was like, man, there's only like 5 minutes left. So this was thankfully not that long. I actually was kind of happy it wasn't very long. He's walking in the woods. He's attacked first by Jake Criss, but he manages to choke Jake Criss with a stick. Then Dave Criss sneaks out of the trunk of a car to attack him. Edwards eventually turns the table and puts Jake Criss back in the trunk of the car. And then it's Callahan versus Edwards. I think Edwards has his stick and Callahan has his bat. They eventually lose those, but Callahan has the skull of a bull, I think, and he attacks him with that. Edwards eventually gets the upper hand in that one too, and then I think he takes the bullhorn and stabs it into either Callahan's head or eye. I don't know what the story they're going with is, but Callahan's just bleeding all over. And while he's doing this and kind of going crazy, Alicia Edwards and Tommy Dreamer show up in their car, and they kind of interrupt it. Edwards hits. They're trying to kind of calm down Edwards, but Edwards hits Dreamer, and he runs after Callahan, and that's kind of the end of the show. I didn't think this was a very good episode. First match, the couple matches were okay, but the storylines weren't advanced a ton. And ultimately, you do want some good wrestling, and there wasn't all that much great wrestling in here. The Woods fight was short, thankfully, but it wasn't very good. A little disappointing, yeah, because Impact had been very good for a while. But it wasn't horrible. At the end of the day, it was watchable. I'm going to go ahead and give it a 7 out of 10. Alright, thanks for watching.